So now I have the great pleasure of introducing our guest speaker. And so now I'm going to read to you his bio and ask you to join me in welcoming him to the podium. So Professor Ahmed Ragab joined Harvard Divinity School in July 2011 as the Richard T. Watson Assistant Professor of Science and Religion. A physician, historian, and scholar of the medieval and modern Middle East. He holds a medical degree from Cairo University, and he did his doctorate work in history and philosophy of science in Paris, France. Professor Ragab's work includes the history and development of medieval Islamic sciences, the relationship between science and religion in the medieval and modern Middle East, the history of medieval Islamic hospitals, and the intellectual and cultural history of women in the region. He is currently completing 2 book projects. Aside from he's also a new dad. So he's a very busy person. But he's working on 2 projects right now, a biography of a hospital, medicine, religion, and charity in the medieval Middle East, which is a study of the medieval Islamic hospital. And his second book project is In the Name of God, the Healer, prophetic medicine in the medieval and modern Middle East, a study of the development of prophetic medicine from the medieval to the contemporary period. Professor Ragab is also working on a research project on perceptions of bodies, genders, and sexualities in medicine, medical, religious, and cultural views in the Islamic world. And so there's a lot more to say about the work he's done and his accomplishments. I couldn't possibly do it justice now, but I also want to thank him because he is on sabbatical this year, and he believes in this program so strongly that he's taking time from that and from his new baby to be here and to address you today. So please join me in giving him a warm welcome to Professor Ragab.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me. So this is not the highlight of the evening. I'm just saying. So don't get your expectations very high. We're just talking. So it's such a pleasure to be here. I'm very happy to be talking to you, and I'm very happy to be invited here. I really wish I was able to come to more of the events of these days, but I'm sure you're having a great time, and it's really a pleasure to have you on campus. So the title of my talk today, I believe, is Knowledge Will Set You Free, Critique as an Ethic of Liberation. So let me start by discussing sort of the first keyword in this title. Knowledge. What do we mean by that? And what do I mean by that in the context of this particular discussion? Well, we can say a lot of things about knowledge. One of the things that we can say about it is that we can divide knowledge, for instance, into esoteric knowledge and exoteric knowledge. Exoteric knowledge is a knowledge that's easily communicable, that we can talk about, that we can teach, read about. It's a knowledge that can be theoretical knowledge, for instance. It can also be practical knowledge, and it can be experiential knowledge. It can be theoretical, in particular, in a lot of theories and discussions and readings and books and scriptures that we are reading and thinking about. It can be practical in terms of all the skills that you learn throughout your life in very clear manner of teaching and learning. It can be experiential, as for instance, you know how to leave from here and go to Harvard Square. You know this by experience, but you're still able, if asked, to explain how to do that. And therefore, it is exoteric. You can really talk about it and explain. And this is most of the knowledge that you will get to encounter on campus here and in many other places, or almost all other places, all other universities, is this form of exoteric knowledge. Esoteric knowledge is a little different. The clearest example, or the most famous example, is mystical knowledge. It's a knowledge that we are not really able to put in words. It's something that we just know. Now, are we able to teach esoteric knowledge? Yes, we can. But we don't teach it itself. We only teach you the way to get there. I can only show you the way, but you'll have to get there yourself. We have that at HDS as well. It's called graduate seminars. So, in a way, esoteric knowledge is this type of knowledge that you get to learn, and you get to learn from people, but you don't really learn the substance, the thing that you know. You get to learn the way. But knowledge can be divided in other ways. We can think of worthy knowledge and unworthy knowledge. We can divide knowledge based on knowledge of what? Is this a thing that's worth knowing or not? Is it trivial or important? Is it significant or not? Is it something that has an impact or not? All these are things that we can use to divide and understand knowledge, but also to attach value to the type of knowledge that we're learning. Because when you say that this is trivial, when you say that this is unworthy of knowing, you're not only describing a particular subject or a particular way of learning or knowledge, but also you are assigning a value to it. You're saying that should I learn it or I shouldn't learn it. In all these divisions, one thing seems to be at the heart of them all, which is knowledge is a process of communication. It's rooted in communication. Even esoteric knowledge has to be communicated in a way. You have to show me that you know, so that I'm able to know that you know. Maybe you can never tell me what you actually know, but you have to show me that you do. Communication seems to be at the heart of knowing. Knowledge becomes a social practice. We know in the society. We know in our surroundings. We know in groups. We don't know individually. Even when you're thinking on your own, just about something that no one else knows about, you tend to think in language. You tend to think as if you're talking to yourself. As if yourself is another person that you're letting them know. Now, what we keep inside and what we share changes with time. Your Facebook status is a way of expressing knowledge. And when you write something about yourself, about what you ate, something that you know, that just interests you really in many cases, when you do that, you're communicating something. You're trying to show people that you know something, and you're also trying to give people the chance to know what you know. But then it's not only about that. Because when you're reading your sort of news feed on your Facebook, you think that, oh, this person keeps writing crazy statuses, and I just, this person is just a bad status writer. This person, on the other hand, is pretty cool. They write comical things, nice things, things that I want to know. It's not about what you want to say. It's not only about what you want to say. It's also about how the others will actually judge this knowledge. In receiving the knowledge and in accepting it, and also in producing it, we're always thinking about the other, the audience of this knowledge, as much as we're thinking about the object of the knowledge. We're thinking about what to know, but also who knows, and more importantly, how to know. Now, in the sphere of communication, where this knowledge is produced, understood, transferred among people, judged, and in many cases categorized and arranged, the key thing here is authority. It is a significant part of the making of this social process of knowing. Because for some reason, some people have more power to know. And they have more power to judge whether this thing is worth knowing or not. One of the reasons why I'm standing here is that I have more authority. And that's why I have this blue ribbon here. And the other faculty, my colleagues, my faculty colleagues here have the same ribbon, which is a sign of authority. We've done something, and therefore, when I talk, everyone else should listen. That's the assumption. And that assumption carries to the classroom here as well. You should listen. So, the idea is, there's this kind of embedded authority that becomes a significant part of the production of knowledge. And this authority is not only about who knows or whose knowledge is more authoritative, but it is also about what to know. Let me give you some historical examples. Let's think about missionary medicine, for instance, and missionary science. The missions that went from Europe to different parts of the world, starting early on in the late 15th century and in the 16th century, first in East Asia, then in the Americas and in Africa and in the Middle East and almost everywhere in the world except Western Europe naturally. These missionaries were not only transmitting a new religion, they were not only attempting to convert people to a new religious belief or a new set of beliefs, they were also, in their opinion, transmitting a whole set of knowables, a whole tradition of knowledge. You had to be able to know things. You had to be able to actually become a different person through this process of knowing. They set up clinics, labs, observatories. They taught people mathematics and medicine. And they were not doing this just to attract people so that they would learn the new religion. They actually thought that in order to be part of this religion, you have to be part of this paradigm of knowing. In order to convert to the white religion, you have to learn the white science and the white medicine. And conversely, in order to learn the white science and white medicine, you have to belong to the white religion. But can you ever? In order to be part of the white religion, you have to speak like white people. You have to speak the language. You have to dress the same. You have to act in a similar way. You have to start to understand yourself in white terms. Your genders have to be just like the white genders. Your sexualities have to be arranged just like the white sexualities. Your history has to be read in the same manner that we read white history. That is a history that develops from the background of civilization into the glorious new age that is in itself being ushered by the white science and the white religion. In order to know, you have to become. You cannot just know. You cannot just open a book and learn. That is not sufficient. You'll always be missing something. And this thing is, you have to become someone else in order to truly know. Now, when these missionary physicians and medical practitioners were thinking about diseases, for instance, they were thinking not only about microbes or disease agents, but they were also thinking about culture and religion. Malaria was not only caused by this kind of disease agent, it was caused because these natives couldn't keep themselves clean. Cholera, the same. Plague, all these diseases. These are diseases that do not exist in Europe just because the white is different. The disease existed in these places because in part these people behaved differently, behaved in the wrong way. If you are to treat these diseases, if you are to treat cholera, you don't need to think about giving fresh water, but you first need to think about how to teach these people to become cleaner. Because it's only when you teach them to become cleaner that they will actually become healthier. Missionary medicine was built not only on combating disease agents, but in thinking about diseases as social and cultural conditions. It is these people that get these diseases. Now, this is not something that happened in the 16th to 18th century and disappeared. We can see the traces of that today. Think about a number of things. Think about the general making of global health policy, for instance, where in many cases, again, we are faced with the problem of fresh water. It is not fresh water, we are told. It is not fresh water that's causing, the lack of fresh water that's causing diseases. It's the fact that people are not clean. Why do we have AIDS in Africa? Because the blacks just have this kind of, promiscuity. They don't have the right morals, and therefore they keep getting these diseases. This is not something that I'm making up. It's part of the making of the health policy in general, global health policy. That when you intervene in order to solve a health problem, part of the intervention, we are told, is cultural and religious intervention. That becomes important because you need to teach these people to behave differently, to be different in order to actually get the right treatment. They cannot perceive, know the new medicine without becoming something different. Now, in this same category, the process of knowing gets to be controlled by infrastructures, by tools, and by methods of knowledge. In many ways, the treatment cannot be produced except in particular places. Our global village is not really a village, it's more of a hierarchy. We have the global north, where we produce things, and we have the global south, where other things are produced and other things are consumed. It is not a sort of a straightforward division where the global north produces and the global south consumes. No, there are other things that the global south has to produce. Consider, for instance, things that have higher environmental and higher labor costs that simply the global north cannot take. One of the reasons why jobs are being outsourced is related to the fact of what jobs are being outsourced. Not all jobs are being outsourced. Many of these jobs that are being outsourced because these jobs should be done somewhere else. Because when you burn coal offshore, that's okay. Because we can have smog in China, but we don't want to have it here. Part of the environmental cost of the development and the cost sharing of our technology, of our science, and of our knowledge is based on this process. On the idea of dividing who knows and how to know. Now, in this process, if this is really how we can know about knowledge, if this is how we can understand knowledge, then how am I saying that knowledge should set us free? How can I reconcile this view, this understanding of knowledge, with the fact that I, as a historian, feel empowered as I write my own history? As a historian, I see myself as the heir to all these poets, shamans, priests that lived with my people for so long to write their own stories. There seems to be that throughout history, there was a reason why the story must be told. Someone had to take this job to tell the story, to tell people about themselves, about their ancestors, about their history, regardless of who says that this history doesn't matter anymore, but someone always had to take this job. Why do I feel empowered when I tell this story? And why do I feel better? I feel more powerful when this story involves all these oppressed and weak that now I consider to be my people. My people do not have to be my race or religion or sexuality or gender. My people can be any people that I think of them as my own. And as I tell their story, I feel empowered. And as all these ancestors of storytellers believed throughout their history, knowing the story and telling the story allowed them to be powerful, to own their own history and to know themselves. So how can we reconcile these two things? How can we reconcile a knowledge that is produced within structures of authority that we all know about and that I talked about for the past 10 minutes maybe, and this new idea or this thing that we feel that when we know, we are becoming more powerful and more liberated? Part of the solution to this question is in how we know. Knowing about ourselves can become a subversive act. It can become an act of owning one's own narrative. Now I can tell a different story. And it is in my ability to tell the different story that I'm finally able to own my own destiny and to control this destiny and to have the power, the empowerment, lies in my ability to tell this different story that no one else would tell. No one else would tell because this is not deemed worthy knowledge. The process of telling a different story is a process of questioning the fundamental, the foundations of knowing in itself. Because once you decide to know differently, you're deciding that the topics that are being told, that you are told are worthy of knowing, are not the only thing that are worth knowing. We need to know more, and we need to know different things. And we need to know these different things in different ways. And this is the heart of critique. The idea that we're able not just to criticize in terms of saying what's wrong with something, but to critique in actually using this knowledge of what's wrong with something to build something different and to understand things in a new way. The idea of critique, which is kin to criticism, is that critique allows me to hold the tools of knowledge and to use them in a different way. In using critique as a way of knowing, we are not speaking about a particular object of knowledge, but we are speaking about the knower. Critique is not a function of the object of knowledge, it's a function of the knower. It's an ethic. It's an epistemic virtue. An ethic because I hold it very dear to myself and I believe that the right knowledge, if you will, the ethical knowledge, the virtuous knowledge can only happen through critique, through our ability to question, constantly question what is being told, to constantly question the paradigms, the discourses, what we see around us, to also question ourselves. In a way, critique becomes our way to transform a knowledge that's created within structures of authority into a tool for freedom and liberation. But that's not the whole story. Because liberation in itself is not a one-way street. It's not a straightforward thing. We just cannot know and then become liberated. It's far more complex than that. Because we are not one. We are a society. Even in this march towards liberation, we are multiple individuals. And many of us will be told within this march of liberation that your turn is not here yet. Wait. And this is something that we see throughout the human struggle in different movements of liberation and civil rights and gender rights. All these issues, there are always people who are still being told, wait, it's not your turn. Next time. You're distracting us. Think about, there are so many examples. Think, for instance, about the national liberation movements that happened in the 50s and 60s. And how many of these movements came to exist on the shoulders of, regular, ordinary people, but still, they told, for instance, the women that you gotta wait a little. It's not your turn yet. They were unable or unwilling to combine a liberation, a political liberation, with gender liberation. Think about the feminist movement and how the feminist movement, in many cases, in many episodes of its history, told the gay liberation movement, for instance, wait, it's not your turn. Next time. When we're there, we'll send you someone to bring you here. But that almost never happens. It keeps happening. Because in the process of liberation, we also create processes of authority and authority concentration. And here again, critique becomes the key concept. Because critique is not only directed towards one particular thing, it's an ethic, it's a virtue. It's our own ability to question ourselves without doubting it, and to doubt our conclusions without hesitating. It's the ability to know how to ask new questions, and yet newer questions. It's the ability to also know and realize that as you gain education here, in this particular place, you gain power and authority. And with this power and authority comes important responsibilities to yourself, to your community, and to other people who never had the chance to be here. And it is this responsibility is what makes this knowledge ethical and virtuous. the responsibility to understand how this power is structured, to understand why now you are more powerful and why others are not, and to understand your own mistakes and your own problems and your own biases, and to keep all the time thinking about what makes you say what you're saying and what makes you think what you're thinking. Again, questioning without doubt, doubting without hesitation. When we're gathering here and we're thinking about the coming years and we're thinking about welcoming you in here, this is the promise that this school, I believe, is giving you. The promise of raising questions. We cannot promise you to give you answers. We promise you to help you ask more and more questions. More importantly, and that's what I'm arguing, it is your ethical duty to ask questions, not to just get answers and distribute them. It's your ethical duty to go back to your community, your colleagues, your people, whoever these people are, your people who could be anyone and everyone, and help them ask more questions. Ask questions about yourself and about others. Ask questions about history. Have the ethical commitment of telling the story, your own story, their story, and everyone's story. Because there's always something more to be known, and as long as there is something to be known, there is something to be critiqued. And in my opinion, this is the ethic of liberation. Thank you. Questions? Yes. You can start questioning right now. Practice that, yeah.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. That was fascinating. I wanted to ask you about another movement, namely the environmental movement. Now, as a scientist, you all know that climate change is occurring, that it's man-made, et cetera, et cetera. I heard a Stanford scientist on the radio the other day saying very, very seriously that we need to be off the grid entirely by 2020. And I'm wondering, given the interest involved, the fossil fuel industry, the politicians and so forth, how we might use knowledge and critique to, I mean, that seems like an unrealistic goal,
Right.
but get towards that goal, and how you might integrate the environmental movement into the other movements that you're talking about.
Thank you very much, Kevin. So this is a great question, because the environmental movement and the ecological movement in general is a very significant example of what I was talking about. So obviously, I mean, the change in our climate is happening, and we just can see it all around us, and it will keep happening, and to be honest, the planet is going down the drain. I mean, it's a fact. But this is not happening today, and didn't start today or in the past decades. It started much earlier than that. It probably started since maybe the 17th or 18th century going forward. And during this process, the history of it is extremely important, because it is the history of it that explains part of our problems. So the history of it is, you had railways, you had power, you had cheap power, fossil fuel, that people were burning, particularly in Europe and in the global north, while the south didn't use any of that. And now the main problem is, you're burning cleaner energy, or saying that you want to burn cleaner energy in the north, and saying that the south shouldn't burn the cheaper, dirtier energy. So there is a fundamental question of equality at stake. And unless this question is addressed, we will never be able to actually address the question of our environmental problems properly. So there is a reason why the Chinese are burning coal. There is a reason why many countries around the world in the global south are still burning fossil fuel and are thinking about nuclear power and so on. And the main reason is because solar energy, for instance, which exists, you have plenty of that in the south, but the tools and the technologies are just not there. So before thinking about how you can move the rest of the world into a cleaner mode, you have to think about how to distribute energy more efficiently. Because the idea that you can only drive a car or watch TV or stay in well-lit room in the north is in itself unsustainable. So, in order to think about the solution to this problem, we need first to obviously think clearly about the scientific facts and understand that this is really a serious issue that we need to think about. But also need to think about historical grievances and how these historical grievances can be corrected. And think about how, in moving to a future of energy in the entire world, we need to think about energy equality. Because you cannot demand people to simply cut their energy usage without providing them with anything. And that goes into the heart of technology, of distribution of technology. Again, in the global south, you probably have a lot of sunlight, a lot of wind. There are just so many sustainable sources. It is almost a no-brainer that you can actually make energy out of this. As a matter of fact, Europe is starting to create solar power plant, the European Union, solar power plants in North Africa. None of this power is going to North Africa. It's going north. So cables are being extended under the Mediterranean. These solar plants are being created in the North African desert. And this power is being essentially shipped to Europe. And at the same time, the power doesn't even exist in this particular part of the world. So there is a fundamental issue of equality here that needs to be addressed if we are serious in any way about solving environmental problems. We also need to think about the additional things that energy does. So a lot of historians talked about what coal did in terms of expanding urbanism. So when you have coal, you also have railways, and when you have railways, you have towns. And these towns are made and created along the railways. Now, this changed dramatically when you had oil, because you don't see oil. Because oil is transmitted in underground pipes, and then in ships that sail to the north without anyone noticing it. And therefore, oil, which became the most important export of the global south, is something that is absolutely not conducive to serious development, as coal was for the British, for instance. So if you go to England and you think about the development of many of the British cities, you actually see that they rose on top of steel and coal. But that doesn't exist in the south. You have oil that just disappears. Nothing else. It comes out of the desert and then it disappears. And the same can happen with solar power. So without having a clear strategy of understanding how you can distribute energy more equally, how you can provide more technological resources for different parts of the world to use their energy resources, we will still be stuck in the same problem. The problem is not that we drive a Chevrolet instead of Prius. The problem is other people need to burn fossil fuel because it's cheaper and because they need electricity. That's the main problem. And we need to solve this problem, but in order to solve it, we have to question the power politics of the global system. And unfortunately, what is really disappointing for me as a person coming from this global south is that the environmental movement here in the United States or in Europe is always thinking about this very narrow idea of let's recycle things, let's clean our own environment, which are great. I mean, definitely recycle things. We have recycle bins here as you go out. So this is great, but that's not enough. And that's again the function of critique. How you can transform just a small struggle against these big fossil fuel industries into a larger struggle for energy equality and therefore for equal opportunities of people. I hope that answers the question. Thank you. Yes?
Me?
Yeah.
So it was a fantastic talk, and
Thank you.
in the talk you mentioned the expression questioning without doubt twice.
Right.
And I'm very curious as to what the difference is and how that's possible, because I know that some would say if we're just questioning without doubt, then it might turn into just some word game where the answer makes no genuine difference.
Mhm.
And I'm very curious as to what you meant by that phrase and how we can begin to do that.
That's a great question. So when I said questioning without doubt, I meant that when we question things, we're not doubting ourselves, but we actually believe more and more in our ability to reach a more equitable and a more liberated society. It is precisely the act of questioning that should give you confidence and therefore protect you from the doubt. So, are we doubting what we're doing, the practices that we're having? Yes. But we're not doubting the process because we continue to question things. It's having this corrective thing that keeps correcting whatever you're doing. And therefore, you continue to question, but you never doubt. And therefore, you continue to doubt, but you never hesitate. And that's the second part of it. You doubt that sometimes maybe I'm not on the right road. And that's natural to doubt. But because I trust my ability to question myself, I trust my ability to critique what I'm doing, I will not hesitate. I will be able to actually take action and move forward and, move away from this kind of word game, as you mentioned.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes.
Really great talk again. I really appreciate this distinction between the ethics of critique, which serves as the ethic of liberation, versus, I guess, an ethic of answers that our culture seems to be so embedded with. So kind of speaking toward this community and how all of us have scholarly sides of us, but not all of us are going into pure academia. How do we, in social ethics and in public policy, turn the tide and try, in a practical sense, to go into religious communities, to go into political communities, and try to imbue this ethic of questioning rather than, is it, like you say, it's so popular to say, what is the right answer? And we're always searching for the right answer and hoping that that's going to be
Right.
the end-all, be-all. So how do we turn the tide on society's fascination with an answering ethic rather than questioning ethic?
That's again another great question. So, and I'm not just saying that; these are really great questions. So, there is, let me go to sort of to a saying that is reported to have been said by Muhammad early on, and it comes to mind. It is not. I mean, some people say that it's not true, but I mean the saying itself is interesting. Someone goes to him and says, "I'm going to hell. I'm just doomed." Why? He says, when we're sitting with you, you talk to us, and it's like we see paradise, it's like we see God, it's like we see the truth in front of us. And then we go, and then we start to think and question, and we have doubts, and I have doubts. And he thought he was doomed because of these doubts. So the answer was, it is doubt that's real faith. That's really the issue here. Doubt is the actual faith. It is your ability to confidently question that proves that you really own this type of knowledge. Now, let's go back to the question of the environment. If you really have a heart-to-heart talk to a scientist and speak about signs of global warming, there is no science without doubt. There is just simply our modern science is built in constant doubting and on hypotheses and theories. Could it be possible that this global warming is just not true or just a cycle? Yes, of course it is possible. There is a possibility. Now, why aren't we having this conversation? Why aren't we talking honestly about this? Why do we have our scientists coming, betraying essentially what they really believe and saying that it's 100% true? And while there's nothing that's 100% true, it's because we think whenever there is doubt, there is no real knowledge, and that's a problem. So the issue is, this is what you need to transmit to your community. As a religious leader, part of it is doubt, question. It doesn't take away from your belief. It makes you own your belief. And it is this ability to own the belief, to confidently question and critique and doubt that allows you to actually feel closer and closer to your own belief. And therefore you move from these kinds of ready-made answers into another type of knowledge, which is, let's all ask more questions. Let's all say, I don't know. Let's all say, this is what I've been told, or this is what I learned, but I think there might be more to it. So, and to be again more and more practical, this comes from you. And that's part of leadership. You transmit that. You're feeling that you are confident in what you know, and you are confident in your ability to question yourself, transmits this feeling to others. You have to be actually able to ask questions, ask very difficult questions, to question your own motives and what you yourself do, and encourage people to do that. And it is only through this way that you can actually transmit this ethic of questioning.
You spoke a little bit about how liberation movements often tend to marginalize other communities even more. I was wondering, could you speak of how, through critique, we can address the way that movements like the feminist movement, that like barely have their foot in the door, can stop marginalizing the queer movement?
So the idea here is that why don't we question, say, the feminist movement from inside? Part of it is we're worried that if we question this foot in the door, we'll just be pulled back and we're back to square one. But that's a problem because that's not true, and it shouldn't be true. That is to say, if you arrive at some form of equality that's just based on these ready-made answers, and that is just based on marginalizing other groups, this is not real equality. What are you seeking? That's the question. Are you seeking equality, or are you simply seeking particular benefits for yourself? And what difference would it make when you say that the feminist movement wants these rights for women? I could, but not others. Let's do women first, and then we'll see later. Well, why is this different from saying that you are being, not you in person, but you are being a feminist because, you want to have a position or a raise or something like this. And once you get it, you're fine. But you don't. Because part of what you're thinking about, or what you should be thinking about, is liberation and freedom and equity and equality in general. And therefore, questioning and asking is not going to take away from you. And that's the idea. It's going to make me more powerful. Because now I'm able to just face my own fears and to understand what's happening. And therefore, is there a fear that when you push, for instance, for queer rights along with feminist rights, that the whole battle could be delayed a little? Yes, of course. That the gains would be delayed a little? Obviously. But then, what is the gain if you're actually unable to gain anything? And if you're essentially submitting to the original paradigm of oppression, which says that some deserve and others do not. By saying that we'll do this now and you come later, you're just submitting to that. And therefore you're recreating the authority in a different way. And again, we see this happening over and over again in so many different movements and throughout history. And the only way of going beyond that is precisely by continuously asking ourselves what we really want, what we're hoping for, without being worried about any of these issues. Yes?
After the Danish cartoon controversy, there was a debate held at Berkeley titled, "Is critique secular?" And
yes.
There were 3 positions and 3 answers. And I guess if your answer is no, critique is not secular, then what about the critique that you're positing is distinctly religious? And how can critique be framed as a religious activity?
So the secular origin of critique is based on the idea that critique in itself is a product of particular paradigmatic, circles and particular discourses. That is to say, that the discursive formations that existed in Western academia, in Northwestern academia, if you will, existed there and created critique, essentially, out of its own understanding of its own community. And that historically is not inaccurate. It is accurate in many ways. But then the issue is re-owning the critique and producing this critique from the South. Producing this critique from a different point of view, from the marginalized point of view. And when you do that, the whole question of is critique secular is in itself problematic. Because the term secular in itself is a product of a very specific historical time. So, is critique secular? Is religion something that is opposed to secular? What does this mean? It means that your church is here and your state and your life and everything else is there. But that can work if I can really go to the polls and choose my own government. But if I can't, my church is not only a place where I pray, it's also a place that provides me with health care. It's also a place that provides me with solidarity. It's a community. It's a place where I belong. It does so many things other than what you can quote-unquote call religion, but it's all religion, or not. Is it? I don't know. It doesn't matter. That's the idea. It doesn't matter. What matters is it performs a particular social function that exists in a very specific social context and historical context. And the question of what is secular and what is religious has to be understood not as a universal question that you can just ask to everyone at any time. No, it's a very specific question that has very specific points of views behind it and very specific agenda that's motivating it. And we have to understand it in this way. So is critique secular? No. Is secularity secular? I don't know. We can keep asking these questions again and again. The point is that by re-owning the critique, it changes. And therefore, it can become something, a different tool that enables this empowerment instead of being part of the larger paradigmatic formation of the Western, Northern academia or discourses.
I kind of have a follow-up on your question. So if we're talking about like social movements and trying to include all different kinds of groups, I feel like we live in a system, you know, like global capitalism. We don't get to have everybody win. That's how the system is set up. We have to have winners, we have to have losers, and thus there have to be groups that get excluded. So where do we go from there? Like, do we just need to like shut down capitalism? Like, let's stop working for money, stop going to Harvard and every other place that we want to go, don't write anything for money, like just, like where's the bright line? Like, do we have to shut everything down? Do we have to maybe shut only some things down? Do we have to tell some people that they don't get to have rights? Can we do that in capitalism?
No.
Give me the deets.
Okay, so again, I mean, well, the problem with this question is that it's a question that's seeking a prescription, which I do not have, and I don't think I should have. And that's the key thing. We should not have a prescription, because we have to know that our knowledge of a new prescription will, in most cases, in the vast majority of cases, will have some form of authority distribution and oppression just built into it. Is there a prescription? No. What keeps me going then? If I don't have an answer for a better society, a more equitable society, if I know that these forms of oppression and discrimination will keep happening, what keeps me going? What keeps me going is the idea that knowledge will set me free, that critiquing myself, knowing more about myself and about others, about how oppression and authority are being practiced and channeled, will make me freer more every day. Are we seeking free people? No, we're seeking freer ones. That's the idea. So, do I have a prescription? No. More importantly, I don't think I should. I think having a prescription is a problem, because by having a prescription, you're imposing a view. What I think you should have is questions. But not questions that are just empty words that we're saying and we're just discussing things, but questions that really touch our lives, that can really show us what we are doing right and what we are doing wrong. Questions that we are honestly thinking about answering and honestly trying to answer, and that we're posing to people, as the saying goes, speaking truth to power, asking the questions, while knowing that when these questions are being answered, there will be more of them, and more of them, and more of them, and we can continue on and on and on our route to become freer, but not free. Because if I say, this is where I am free, it simply means that I'm marginalizing and excluding other people. Yes?
How does the term knowledge relate in poverty-stricken communities where the educational gap has become enlarged, where there are lack of resources and you have teachers who are just in the classroom but they're not there fully to give knowledge?
This is exactly part of what I'm talking about. That knowledge in general is controlled through specific infrastructures, and these infrastructures influence everything. Not only, and this just spreads across the board. It's not only about teachers who do not have the money or the time to devote to their students, or students who do not have particular resources to learn new things. It's about the fact that when you want to access an article on a database, for instance, you can buy this article for $40. That can be in the global south, that can be someone's monthly salary. If you're a physician or a scientist, how are you supposed to keep up when you simply cannot even know what these people are writing? But the thing is, that's the reality that we're fighting against. One step at a time. You try to use as much power, as much opportunity that you have in order to do that. And that's why your being here is a responsibility. And that's why when you learn something, you have this responsibility of teaching and of telling people things. Now you'll be able to do things and you won't be able to do other things. So I can talk about a lot of things, but I can't teach you nuclear physics right here. I just can't. Neither any of you would just be able to go, say, to your own churches or town halls and teach nuclear physics. This cannot happen. But we can try by trying again and again to critique the power structures. Again, like when we're talking about environmental politics, we keep saying that, keep this in your mind. It's not only about your cars here, it's about other people, it's about historical grievances. All these questions need to be brought up. So the idea is, for everyone here, we have this responsibility that comes with being here. And you have this responsibility to other people who none of them can be here. And that's the issue. People that many of them you just don't know. But you have the responsibility to actually try and work in order to change things, in order to make life a little better every day, in order to make yourself and others freer a little bit every day. Thank you very much.